everyone, in today's video I'm going to share with you a real world review of what it was like using the Sony A7 III at a wedding and answer everyone's question of whether or not I'm moving to Sony. Before we jump into today's video, I just wanted to mention that I have Lightroom presets that I use to edit all my photos with. There are a variety of presets depending on what look or style you're after, and you can find them all at digitalfilmactions.com in case you're interested in taking a look. So why did I actually get the Sony A7 III? I ended up getting this body for the wedding photography that I do. I normally use the Canon 5D Mark III to photograph weddings. I have two of the same camera bodies and two different focal lengths on each body, and I have the cameras on holdfast straps so I can use them both throughout the entire day. I find that the Canon 5D Mark III is great for taking photos throughout the day. However, when it comes around to the reception, lately I've been feeling like they're falling a little bit short. We have a lot of rustic and vintage style wedding venues in Australia, and I feel like they would really suit natural light photos rather than flash photos. I can shoot a few natural light images on the Canon, however when you zoom in to 100%, they are very grainy and not as sharp as I would like them to be. So because of that, I tend to use more flash images rather than natural light because I want the photos I deliver to be really high quality. I feel like by using flash, however, you do lose a lot of that ambience in the photos, and this is something I've been wanting to evolve with my photography and what I deliver to my clients. When I use flash at a wedding, I normally have it pointed upwards so the light bounces either off the ceiling or off the white card that's sticking out of my flash to make it look as natural as possible. I still find though that even though I do that, the images still look kind of cold and lifeless and don't really embody that feeling of a rustic venue that the couple are having their wedding in. This is why I ended up getting the Sony A7 III. I needed a camera body that was able to produce those images that I was imagining in my head with that warm feeling, with ambience, and that really captures the environment and the moment that we're in. So I've used the Sony A7 III a couple of times since we first got it just to practice and get used to the way that it works. And I took it to my very first wedding this weekend, and oh my god, I am so impressed with the way that it worked. Let me get into all the details and explain everything that happened. So throughout the day, I was photographing like normal. I had my two Canon bodies that I was using throughout the entire day. And then by the time the reception came around, I decided to pull out the Sony and put the Canon 135mm f2 on it to photograph the speeches. The venue that we were working in is quite small, which is why I decided to go with the most telephoto lens that I have. I didn't want to really get in the way of anyone while the speeches were happening because it is a very kind of intimate venue, so I decided to stay back a little bit. And with this lens, I ended up getting some close-up photos of the people speaking, as well as the bride and groom reaction and the reaction of the guests to the speeches. And I also got some wider shots that showed a little bit more of the environment with the speechmaker in it as well. Using the Canon 135mm was such a big surprise because I feel like that lens actually worked better on the Sony A7 III than it does on Canon. At first I was selecting my focus point by using the touchscreen on the LCD, and then eventually I decided to start trying out how the eye focus was working, and it turns out that it worked so well in this kind of lighting, so I ended up using eye autofocus for the rest of the speeches, and pretty much every single photo that I took was tack sharp. As always, when introducing a new piece of gear into your workflow in a professional environment, I still did take photos of the speeches with my Canon as well, but straight away, just on the back of the camera, I could see how much better the shots were on the Sony. I felt like even on the back of the camera, I could see that there was more dynamic range in the lighting, the shadows weren't as harsh, there was a lot of detail in the photo, and there was barely any noise. So I was looking at the back of the camera while I was taking photos, but once the speeches were over, I really took my time in reviewing the photos and zooming in to 100%, and I realized that the Sony photos were looking absolutely amazing. So I ended up getting rid of one of the Canon bodies from my holdfast straps and replacing it with the Sony's. So I had the Sony A7 III on one side and the Canon 5D III on the other side. And even though I was taking photos here and there with the Canon, I could really see just how high quality the photos on the Sony were, so I pretty much ended up using the Sony for the majority of the reception. Throughout the night, I also used the Canon 85mm 1.2 and the Canon 50mm 1.2 on the Sony camera, just for some mingling shots of the guests kind of talking, and I also used the 50mm for the first dance, which was outside underneath some lights. And again, both these lenses worked really well in this low light situation. So this is a venue that I've worked at many times before with my Canon cameras, and I already knew that there are some areas where it's simply impossible to get naturally lit photos with the Canon cameras. This is because of things like, because it's too dark, the Canon cameras simply can't focus fast enough, and they would also be way too grainy in that kind of lighting. So I decided to test out how the Sony would do in that situation instead, and just take a look at this photo that I took at ISO 16000. It is really clear, barely any noise, and the camera had no issues focusing whatsoever. I feel like all my wedding problems and limitations have been answered with Sony. I feel like all the places where Canon was falling short and all the things I was missing from my workflow have now been filled in with the Sony A7 III. Am I switching to Sony? The short answer is no. I was never looking to replace Canon. I was looking for something to complement it in areas where the Canon fell a little bit short, and I feel like the Sony A7 III is the missing piece. A couple of other things I wanted to mention is that compared to the Sony A7 II, the Mark III has amazing battery life. I believe after the wedding reception, the battery was only on like 60%, and I hadn't even changed it yet, so battery life is amazing now. And also, since the A7 III has 2 card slots, I can now use it in professional ways. So I can take the camera to a wedding, or I can take it to a photo shoot, as my photos are instantly backed up as I'm shooting them. So I've had a couple of people ask me if I've ever had a card go corrupt, since I'm so adamant about not shooting with 2 card slots. I have luckily never had a card go corrupt, but since we have the technology available to back up your photos instantly, I'm never not going to use that. So for me, 2 card slots is an absolute must in a camera body. With something like a wedding, I'm still not confident enough to take the A7 III as my second camera body to complement my Canon 5D Mark III. I still would like to shoot on my Canons for the majority of the day, and then take the A7 III out for the reception for those natural light photos in darker areas. In saying that, using my Canon lenses on the Sony body is a learning curve, so maybe the more I use it, the more I'll get used to the way it works, and I will be able to start incorporating it into my workflow a little bit more than just at a reception. Something like the weight of the A7 III compared to the Canon is a really big bonus for me, and I would absolutely love to shoot a wedding on just Sony cameras, because I am pretty sore after shooting a full day wedding with Canon cameras, so it would be nice to be able to do that at some point, but for the time being, I'm going to keep incorporating it into my workflow little by little and just see where it goes kind of naturally. Well, I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please let me know in the comments what you think of a camera kit that has both Canon and Sony in it. Is that something that you would ever do? But otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys all next time. Bye!